Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts, and of course thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegulu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, the Nigerian government has been advised by its Presidential Economic Council to scrap fuel subsidies with immediate effect. The subsidies, which cost billions of dollars a year, keep the price of fuel low, but there is a warning that goes with it. Their removal will cause a sharp rise in other prices. So how much is this likely to tear Nigeria's economy apart, as the labor unions are predicting? We'll speak to one of Nigeria's leading oil and gas policy experts who provides advice on oil and gas governance reforms. And later, despite the dominance of agriculture in many economies, outdated systems and poor access to finance continue to deter the development of the farming sector in Nigeria. But one US-based company is trying to change that. It's working with other food and agro-allied services companies to co-invest in the cassava value chain in Nigeria, to create industrial food ingredients for both the domestic and global export markets in the manufacture of consumer packaged goods. So how far have they come with it? We'll speak with the chairman of Shine Bridge Global Incorporated, which is working in partnership with the African Development Bank. Coming up. First, to the disputatious and highly emotive issue of the removal of fuel subsidy in Nigeria. It's a topic that elicits deep unhappiness amongst many Nigerians as they come to terms with paying a much higher price for fuel. And there is a knock-on effect as well on the cost of transportation, food, electricity, and even phone charging. Well, the Presidential Economic Advisory Council is advising the government of President Buhari to remove the subsidy immediately. And not surprisingly, the conversation is kicking once again in Nigeria in reaction, with many opposed to the move. The government has previously said that the money freed would be invested in infrastructure and development, but many Nigerians fear that they won't see any development with the fuel subsidy money.
Of course, it should. It's long overdue. Postponing is like pushing the evil day forward. It has to be done. I guess past governments didn't have the political will to implement it. The earlier we do it, the better for everybody and for the economy. That is, if it's done sincerely. That's my take on that.
Why are we paying tax? Is it not for us to at least have a relief? We are paying tax and we are suffering. When they increase fuel, like what is happening now, before tomorrow now, if a mudu of garri is selling 350, to go to 500, before you know, the marketer will say, they have increased fuel, no fuel in the town. They cannot go and buy the goods. So if government want to help, let them put eye, let everybody do whatever is supposed to do. The areas of fuel, let government take serious.
Well, a couple of people reacting there to the notion of the removal of subsidy on petrol. Well, for more on the Nigerian Presidential Economic Advisory Council's advice to President Buhari to remove that subsidy on petrol, I'm joined now in the studio by one of Nigeria's leading oil and gas policy experts, Henry Adigun, who provides advice on oil and gas governance reforms. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much.
This is not a surprise, is it? I mean, the subsidy is not in the 2021 budget, and the fear is that it'll have to be paid for by the national oil company, the NNPC, which will further reduce revenues that are accruing to the Nigerian government.
Yeah, that's very correct. I think a lot of people have a poor understanding of the way it works. People think, first of all, people think it's false, that there's no subsidy. People think it's the only gain they get from Nigeria. People feel that it has a knock-on effect on matters. So there are a lot of truths in what they feel, but a lot of realities we face as well. The simple issue is this. We've been doing subsidies since 1974. We've tried to stop it several times. We've had start and stops. But we know it's unsustainable. We know we can't afford it. And the truth of the matter is there's no savings. Every time I hear the savings, I keep on asking, where is it from? You save money when you budget for something. So if you plan to spend 10 naira, you spend 6 naira, then you save 4 naira. Now, when you don't have any budget and you spend 6 naira, are you still having savings? So what you're doing is stopping a leak. Now, NNPC reported that they will be unable to pay money into the federation account because of this issue. We have a system where states are struggling to pay salaries. We have a system where people can't meet balanced budgets. And then you have something that doesn't benefit everybody, benefits only the rich and the middle class in society. And then people keep on saying, oh, no, stop it, style benefits. And you ask them, who gains more from it? I mean, a man with a bigger car gains more than a car with a motorcycle. A man with 3-4 cars gets more than the guy in the bus. Now, it's true there will be inflation. It's true there'll be price rises. But again, the reality is everything does go up everywhere in the world. I mean, the price of yam is the same price of yam 10 years ago. The price of bread is the same thing. Petrol is a commodity. With free diesel prices have gone up and down in the last 3-4 years. I mean, it was 210, 255, 265. It's gone to 197. That's diesel. Kerosene, which is the most common thing the poor use, has gone up and down. So why is petrol the only thing we're emotionally tied to? I mean, there's an emotional tie to it which doesn't follow economics, doesn't follow anything, but just that, oh, this is the only thing we get. No, it's not the only thing we get. And now, because we think it's the only thing we get, we are not efficient in the way we manage ourselves. I tell people the biggest competitor to petrol right now is the internet. It's interest. I mean, now when we work from home for a period of time, there was less traffic, less people went to places. Then the amount of petrol we use went less. Now power tariffs went up. Now we're more efficient. Everybody knows how to buy energy-saving bulbs. People know how to put off their lights. People know that you can't run things forever. People are managing the way they use it. It's the same thing with everything that's a product. How do you spend today and tomorrow on a product? And I tell people, look, we're not subsidizing only Nigeria. We're subsidizing West Africa in real terms because there is no way we consume the volumes we read in papers. It's not possible. We don't have that kind of capacity. Now, because we have a lower prices and there's a lot of poor border control, then you subsidize other countries, and you're doing it with the money of the future.
Right.
I remember,
I think the challenge and the big, I mean, you've laid it out quite well there, but I think the challenge really for a lot of people in Nigeria is the knock-on effect on so many other areas of life. So we're not talking about just the price of fuel going up. We're talking about the impact it's going to have on everything. And when you're in a country where people are earning, some people, less than $2 a day, and that's being generous because things have worsened for a lot of people, that's a big worry. I mean, if you look at the price of petrol at the moment, I think it's hovering around 170 naira or so per litre.
It's 165, 160. Yeah, okay.
Well, it hovers around.
That's a good point.
If you compare that to the international prices, I mean, you're looking at about 400 and something per litre. In the UK, for example, that you're quite familiar with, you're talking about 600 and something naira per litre. But that's an argument that doesn't hold water in Nigeria because the earning power is not the same, is it?
You're correct. I don't use the argument. I don't believe the argument. I don't believe in conversion of pounds to naira and everything. I mean, the wages you earn in Nigeria, spend in Nigeria. And that bottle of Coke argument, a bottle of Coke is more expensive. I don't buy that. But let me say the challenge we have right now, which is the true thing. Nigeria is driven by a civil service population. So a lot of states outside Lagos and Abuja and co have high civil servants in numbers. I mean, most states spend about 80% of their earnings on recurrent expenditure to pay salaries. The danger is that you might not earn $2 anymore if you continue subsidy. The danger is if you continue subsidy, there will be no $2 for you to earn because it's simple. The money from crude sales is what accrues for our reserves. I mean, the biggest accretion to our reserves is crude sales. Now, we've been deferring subsidy with crude sales. So if we sell 10,000 barrels of crude, just hypothetically, and we import this number of petrol, what an NPC does is defer the cost from crude sales, meaning less remittance to the federation account. Now, in a country where crude sales drives 65% of your GDP, I didn't say contributes, drives it. If you have no accretion to your reserves, you have no payment to FAC accounts, then your GDP will crash. So you're at the point where, yes, I totally agree with the argument. It's difficult to convince anybody to pay more for it than it should be based on the wages. But the thing is that it's at the point where you're going to collapse and crash.
Yes, but you see, the arguments that some of the unions are making and other people on the streets is that there are a lot of other things in the mix here. There is the big problem, first of all, of insecurity, which is also having its own impact. But there is also, and you touched on this briefly, the obscene amounts of money that is allocated to cater for people in government. I mean, so there is a big conversation around the continuing cost of government in Nigeria and why that is never reduced. Do you see all that coming together to strengthen opposition to the notion of subsidy removal?
Well, I'm going to give some facts now, which
Right.
are facts based on research we've done. The cost of governance in Nigeria is high. But again, in the costs of other things, it's not as high as people presume it is. We did the modeling. When I say we, my former office, we did the modeling on what it would mean to reduce cost of governance and what it means to the budget. Believe me, it's less than 10% of what we spend. Now, there are issues around it. Now, the same union are opposed to reducing cost of governance. I mean, when the minister talked about looking at wages and seeing how we can structure properly, what they took out of it was that they want to cut salaries. No, that's not what he's talking about. What we have is a skew that's obscene. Now, you have a director in a civil service living in Abuja that earns 270. You have a director in a public service earning 2.4 million. You have a director in another agency of government earning 1.9 million. That is totally wrong. That's where the problem starts from. And that's where the cost becomes astronomical. Now, we don't pay living wages. I mean, we've tried to increase wages in the last few months, but most states can't even pay it because, one, they have so many agencies. I mean, this government is responsible for its own problems itself. It's created more agencies than it ought to, and it has done a lot of things that shouldn't have been. I mean, you tell a government that comes into power based on a company economy doesn't freeze employment. In the last years, this government has recruited hundreds of thousands of workers, bloated the wage bill further. And the National Assembly has been complicit as well, allowed agencies that shouldn't be earn more disparity. So you create an agency and call it maybe just for discussion. You say NCC. So NCC is a regulator. Then the NCC head can earn 89 million. Then the same NCC head in the same economy will earn 89 million. Then somebody working as the prime secretary in the ministry earns around 5,000. How do you judge that in the economy? And then you earn some entry levels in some
Right.
agencies. So that's the kind of problems you talk about. Now,
Okay, let me, I'm sorry to interrupt
Go
you.
ahead,
I'll
please.
come back to allow you to continue to finish that thought, but I've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the Nigerian Presidential Economic Advisory Council's advice to President Buhari to remove subsidy on petrol and adopt a pricing regime that reflects the cost of the product. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. So possibly no more cheap fuel for Nigerians soon. Cheap, comparatively. Most of them see the low cost of petrol as the only benefit they receive from the country's oil wealth. But Nigeria's Presidential Economic Advisory Council has asked President Buhari to remove the subsidy on petrol and adopt a pricing regime that reflects the cost of the commodity. But not surprisingly, every time there's been any mention of removing petrol subsidy, there's been an angry reaction on the streets, with many people fearing that it'll have a knock-on effect on the cost of other goods and services, such as transportation and food, to mention just two. And with me in the studio, one of Nigeria's leading oil and gas policy experts, Henry Adigun, who provides advice on oil and gas governance reforms. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And you were making a very interesting point before we sadly had to interrupt you to take a break about the cost of government. A lot of people complain that the cost of government is never reduced, whereas that which affects the common person on the street, which is fuel subsidy, is being reduced. And you were giving us your analysis there.
Yeah, so I think the common man needs to understand what to advocate for. So the issue is not the salaries people earn. There are disparities that are poor and there's a lot of inefficiencies. But what people should look about is what is the inefficiency in the budgetary process? What's the misallocation in the budget process? So when people talk, oh, senators earn 20 million a month, 25 million a month, you know what a senator would do? You pull out a salary slip and show you, oh, my salary is 634,000 a month. Now, then you say, oh, well, but I heard you earn this. But that's not what you should be looking at. The first problem you should be looking at is the allowances allowed for people in National Assembly, for people in government, for people in some parastatals. The allowances are obscene. They are obscene and are not market reflective and have wide disparity with what it should be. Now, why do you have a system that allows a senator to have 10 million running costs every month? Why do you have a system where you have a House of Rep member having 8 million running costs every month?
But you see, that doesn't make any difference to the ordinary person,
Okay.
whether or not you call it an allowance or a salary. The important thing is that that money is coming from the coffers of government.
Exactly.
And it's being sucked out into the pockets. And a lot of people feel that they don't see evidence of these constituency projects.
That's even a different case entirely,
Yeah.
because constituency projects are between 100 and 200 million naira for each people, which they can use for as a design. But again, these are the issues around the revenue mobilizing agency. But what Nigerians should ask for is not, so they focus, so National Assembly. Well, National Assembly's costs are 2% of the national budget, 2%. And I tell people, look, there are three tiers of government. There's the executive, there's the legislative, and the judiciary. So if one of the arms has 2% of cost, then where is the major cost? The executive. That's where you should think about. How does a government agency have 934 MDAs? 934. What are they doing? The multiplicity of agencies is killing. Every government has come to power since the Onosari report. I said they implement it. Why don't they implement it? Why do you have agencies that are, a lot of agencies don't do anything.
You think it's got to do with political will, just the same
There's
way that they
political
don't
will,
implement the
there's
removal
political
of
will,
subsidy?
There's the labor unions themselves as a problem, and then there are Nigerians. So when you think about the Onosari report, which was a very good report, which I thought a government focused on reforms should have implemented. Buhari came with a goodwill when he came in 2015. That would have been his first starting point. We also have a lot of goodwill. People know we're bleeding. The economy is dying. Petrol, crude prices were down. Implement it.
You made a very interesting point there, sorry to interrupt you, about the unions, which seems to suggest that there's a double standard there. That, in other words, on the one hand, they're making the argument about keeping fuel subsidy and so on. But the minute you talk about saying, okay, let's try and reduce the cost of government and so on, they get very worried because they think you're going to reduce people's salaries.
Or you're going to lay off people.
Right.
And the question is this: when a boat is sinking, and you know you're all going to sink, you take out the heavyweight and throw them off the board to make sure that people that can survive. But labor unions in Nigeria are very funny. The same argument they make, we want subsidy must stay. Okay, so which subsidy? Petrol. Okay, what about diesel, which is a manufacturing arm, which goes GDP? Well, it can go. Kerosene, where the poor is no. So what's petrol about? Well. When they get into government, and I can give examples, they change their mind because they see the figures themselves. It happens with the president himself. He said, I didn't believe subsidy. He said subsidy was a scam. Well, he got into government, he provided $1 billion for the first subsidy regime. That's a very challenge we have. People not even knowing the truths about what's happening there. Then they come in and they say, okay, let's implement the Onosari report. Then the same labor unions will say, oh, no, you can't do that. There will be job losses. This is not a time to economy. And I say the boat will sink. We'll all sink. We'll all die. If we are doing 105 billion naira every month on subsidies and we don't have a budget for it, who is paying for it? All of us are paying for it.
Right, okay. But the problem, of course, is that even before the subsidy is removed, as we're talking about it now, you'd probably just go out and find that the petrol stations have already raised their prices even before. Just the fact that it's being talked about,
no, you're
and
correct.
The president is being advised.
You're correct.
That tends so life clearly going to get tougher in any case for most Nigerians.
Well, I think again that's correct. Abuja is very funny. Just talk about it, like you said, they stopped selling. But again, beyond the subsidy itself, there's a lot of inefficiency in the system, which we don't talk about. So government says, let's take a subsidy because the government can live with inefficiencies. They know the inefficiencies. They know the volumes we consume are not realistic. They know the template. I ask everybody, who knows the landing cost of petrol and what is it based upon? Why, for instance, are we paying lightering charges to MP in dollars? Why the template for a position itself is very inefficient. Now we could start from that point and say, well, if we use a market-driven template that allowed real charges and allowed what we should pay and take out all the dollar units and cost units, then we might get a clear landing cost, which subsidies lowest figures below. Second thing is volume. I've always said it, we can't consume some 3 million liters. When we did the first price review in 2016, we fell from 43 million liters consumption per day to 37. It had gone to 55 million liters. So there's inefficiencies are there itself. Third thing is this disclosure and transparency. As of now, it's very opaque. I don't know what constitutes the landing cost of diesel. And I say, well, I should know. I think I've been in industry for enough time to know. I don't know what constitutes the landing cost of kerosene. PPRA published a template. It lasted only 2 days on their websites. Why did they take it down? Why didn't they allow Nigerians to debate that template and say, well, this is inefficient? And I know that they've added more things to that template of inefficiency. So there's inefficiency in governance itself. Now, government itself doesn't give out the right signals all the time. So you say today we want to, then you're afraid to do it. You tell people, but people are already suffering as it is. Now I totally accept this, and I tell people government shouldn't ever lie. Now government starts lying when it says the savings we make from it, and I said, well, what savings? When you tell people we'll make savings and we'll spend it somewhere else, people ask you, we didn't say anything else, but you don't make any savings, because saying savings is a lie.
But the Economic Advisory Council must have thought this through. I mean, you've got some really high-powered people, you know, on that panel who are well-respected economists and so on and so forth. What are the benefits in their view, your interpretation of that for the country of the removal of subsidy?
So the first thing which is deal is affordability. Now, when you place, I mean, in the report they understand and accept that it will cause inflation and price hike. They know that. But you see, when you're making decisions in economics, you look at you do a cost benefit analysis. There's a cost, there's a benefit. Now, the benefits to removal, one is the efficiency. First of all, you take out all the corruption, which by itself is 35 to 40% of the cost of petrol. That is a big factor of it. The landing cost is affected by efficiency. Second thing you do is you allow the downstream to grow. We don't have a downstream. Nigeria, I tell everybody, Nigeria is not an oil nation. Nigeria is a crude selling nation. There are no refineries. There's no downstream efficiency. There's no midstream in real terms. All we do is get the crude, put it in the barrels, and ship them out of the country. Now, for every barrel of crude shipped out of the country, there's a loss of $846 in terms of what you could have done by value addition. Now, who brings? I mean, you see now we've got 3 model refineries working in Nigeria. None of them produce petrol. None of them produce petrol because they can't recover their costs, and nobody's going to wait to be owed money for months. Money you borrowed from a bank to build a refinery, but we produce diesel because diesel is the market price. Kerosene is produced, other ones are produced, but petrol nobody touches it. Now you want the downstream to grow. You want it to be able to attract investments. Downstream brings jobs. A refinery, extraction is technologically efficient, so you don't need more people. I mean, the way we're even going, the next few rigs we'll have in the next few years, if the PIB is passed, we'll have less manpower. But downstream is where you can create jobs in services, in chemicals and such. So that's one of their thinking. Then the third part of it is the effect.
Briefly.
The last thing we'll look at the dollar. You know, petrol has 2 independent factors. International price of the product and your foreign exchange. The Naira will keep on sliding.
Right.
You can't defend the Naira without aggression to your reserves.
I have to say that
as it's going, you're in trouble.
Your analysis is very, very interesting. I want to thank you very much indeed, Henry Adigun, who is an oil and gas policy expert and provides advice on oil and gas governance reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including we'll speak with the chairman of a US-based company that's working with other food and agro-allied services firms to co-invest in the cassava value chain in Nigeria to create industrial food ingredients for both the domestic and global export markets. Stay with us.